Okay, the video started, guys.
Cool.
Oh, can we borrow this?
Yeah, go for it.
That's from.
Oh, is it?
Awesome. All right.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Do we have a pointer?
No, unfortunately. Sorry.
I'll switch then. And so, hi everyone. I'm Holden Patrick Kors, and I'm here today to talk about our. I'm the president of Democracy Matters here, and it's a club about promoting civic awareness, engagement, educating people about politics and how it works, and also, because we believe in democracy, we're against voter suppression and money controlling politics. And I'm going to talk about how this all matters to us in this presentation. I'm also president of the United Nations of Students, two great clubs that next semester I'm hoping to hand off to Esther to be my successor. Does anyone know her? Yes, she's a nice lady. I'm sure she'll do a great job. So anyway, here we go. A little history of voter suppression in Arizona. So, this country, even though the United States declared independence from Great Britain in 1776, declaring independence doesn't actually make you independent. The American Revolutionary War did not end until 1783. So that's kind of like when the United States really gained independence. So this is what North America looked like at that time. And it kind of puts it into perspective. So the USA were a much smaller country, condensed back east. But eventually there would be a westward expansion. So you can see sort of the major power players here. We have America, New Spain, so this was still under Spanish rule, as Florida, Louisiana, that went back and forth, and this the Northwest. So anyway, next slide. Let's say, so anyway, at this time, Arizona was part of Mexico. Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821, and for the first 2 years of independence, Mexico had an emperor, Agustin de Iturbide, but he was pretty unpopular, so he was overthrown only 2 years into Mexican independence. And Mexico became a republic. And this period of Mexican history is known as the first federal republic. Mexico is a federal presidential republic like America. And then this map here in green are the states, and then in gray are the territories. So southern Arizona was part of the state of Sonora and Sinaloa, which are two separate states, and then the rest of Arizona was part of the territory of Alta California. So this is right there. So to put it in historical perspective, this is what was happening here at the time before Arizona would become part of the USA. So and this was the Mexican flag at the time.
Which still looks very similar.
Yeah, they just changed the coat of arms in the middle. Yes, please. And then these are some of the first presidents of Mexico. This was Victoria Guadalupe, who was the first president for 6 years. He made a lot of good reforms. This was Guerrero, what's his first name? Vicente Guerrero, and he was the first and only black president of Mexico. He was president in 1829, and his dad was black and his mom was indigenous, and he was from Veracruz, and he abolished slavery. And anyway, a lot of the white elites in Mexico didn't like him, and they overthrew him. See, in Mexico at the time, it was somewhat democratic fairly democratic by the standards of the early 19th century, and how they elected their president was each state got one vote, and then that's how the states elected the president. But then they got rid of that after the Mexican Revolution. But in America, in the USA, we still kind of have a system where the states elect the president. So anyway, they overthrew him, and then a few years later, this guy, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, he was elected president. But and this is actually, he lived long enough to get photographed. So that's a photograph of him when he was younger. But he quickly kind of abolished the young democracy, and he made himself a dictator. And even though he was powerful, he was not competent, which leads me to the next slide. Oh wait. So meanwhile, back east in the USA, the main dividing issue in America at the time was slavery. That was the #1 social issue that divided people. And in the North, people were against slavery and thought it was evil, while in the South, the white people were for it and thought it was good for you. They supported it for a number of reasons. So anyway, as a compromise, they had the Mason-Dixon line, which divided the country between free and slave states, and the South wanted to expand westwards so they could admit more slave states in the Union, because as a compromise at the time, for each slave state that was admitted, they had to admit a free state to keep it balanced. And so California was a free state, and so on. Anyway, next slide. So anyway, in 1846, the Mexican-American War started. The president at the time of the U.S. was James K. Polk, a Democrat, and obviously the president of Mexico was Santa Anna, who I was talking about. And this was actually the third war he lost. He was that bad and incompetent. Yes, Alana?
Santa Anna was our black president?
No, that was Vicente Guerrero. Warrior. No. So anyway, no, Santa Anna, I think he was white, or maybe he was mestizo. But anyway, so he had lost 3 wars. The first war he lost was the Pastry War, or sorry, the first war he lost was the Texan Revolution, because these white Southerners moved into Texas, which was a part of Mexico, and they didn't like that Mexico had abolished slavery and they weren't allowed to keep their slaves. So there were some other reasons, but that was the main reason they revolted against Mexico, and then they declared independence, and then Texas was independent for a little bit before joining the United States as a slave state. And it's still a pretty controversial issue in Texas today. But yeah, so Texas, that was the first war he lost. He was actually winning until he got captured. He was winning the war, and he got captured in an ambush, and the Texans made him sign a treaty giving Texas away, giving Texas independence. Then he lost the Pastry War to France, which was kind of caused by, it's called that because it was kind of started by a pastry shop owner in Mexico City who was French. But that's a funny story for another day. Well, it's not funny because Mexico lost and people died. But anyway, so Santa Anna, now there's the Mexican-American War between the USA and Mexico. And, the U.S. dominated and won decisively, and Mexico was defeated, and the U.S. Army marched on Mexico City.
Was the United States backed by any allies?
No.
Oh.
But the war was actually, it was, because of the whole slavery question, in the North, a lot of people were against the war, like Abraham Lincoln was against it. The Massachusetts state legislature, I think, even voted to condemn it. Frederick Douglass was against it, but in the South, people were for it because they wanted to have more slavery in this area. I think it really shows their hypocrisy, was that they said that, oh, I know slavery is bad, but we have to have it because it's a necessary evil, but then they also want to expand it and make more places dependent on this necessary, quote, evil. But anyway, so this is kind of the movements of the war. So then at the end of the war in 1848, after 2 years of fighting, they agreed on the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which was the end of the war settlement, and that's on the next slide. So this was what they agreed upon. So like this area is what was initially Texas after that got independence from Mexico. Then there's this disputed area here. But then anyway, the point is all of the rest of this was annexed, except for that, by the United States in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. However, there were still, even though it was pretty sparsely populated, there were still Mexicans in this area. So under the treaty, they could choose between U.S. and Mexican citizenship. And even if they chose Mexican citizenship, they still were allowed to keep their property.
What does annex mean?
Taken over, controlled. So This is how the United States got its current shape. And obviously, this war was pretty disgraceful and humiliating for Santa Anna. He does a bad job at running the country. He loses 3 wars. He lost half of Mexico's landmass. And then in his final act, he actually sold this tiny little area right here in the Gadsden Purchase in 1853. And this includes Tucson, Nogales, southern Arizona. And that gave the contiguous U.S. its current shape. But anyway, and after that, that was just his disgraceful final act, and it was finally over for Santa Anna. He was overthrown in a rebellion, and then he died a blind beggar. And I don't feel bad for him. But anyway, so basically, even after annexation, the Mexicans in this area, according to the treaty, still, if they took up the U.S. citizenship, they still had all the same rights, supposedly. And there was even before a lot of gringo settlers came in from the east. The idea was that the government business could still be conducted in Spanish if it was necessary, which it was. But then once more and more gringos came over, the population got less Mexican, less Native American, and more white, and that's how the English language came to dominate more, and there were less rights for Chicanos as a group. So anyway, next slide, please. So anyway, in Arizona, this is from this AZ Central, the Arizona Republic article about this. The legislature bestowed voting rights on every white male citizen of the United States and every white male citizen of Mexico now within the territory's boundaries. However, citizens could not vote in several elections. Citizens could vote in several elections, but not for president and governor, who was chosen federally. Arizona was initially part of the New Mexico territory, but it was broken off in the Civil War, and it became the Arizona territory. And territories have much less rights under U.S. federal laws. That's like why Puerto Ricans have less rights today. And of course, if you live in a territory, you don't have all the same rights, and it applied to people who lived in Arizona then, even white people, but especially for people who were not white. Yes, oh yes, I'm ready. So anyway, and eventually Arizona would be admitted to the Union as a state in 1912, along with New Mexico that same year. And finally, some people gained the right to vote, but some did not. See, there were, in the 15th Amendment, passed after the American Civil War, it said, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution says you cannot deny people the right to vote based on their race or color. However, a lot of states, especially southern states where there are a lot of black people, found a workaround. So there couldn't be a law that said you can't vote because you're black. So what they would do instead is in order to vote, you had to pass a literacy test. And the questions weren't that hard, but there were a lot of them, and you needed a perfect score to pass. And so that kind of made it kind of difficult. However, if you had a grandparent or if you had a relative who could vote in the 1860s, well, then you didn't have to go through the literacy test. You're automatically enfranchised, and that just so conveniently happened to apply to all white people and hardly any black people or other non-white groups. And so what they did in Arizona was the same thing. They copied that strategy from the South. And even though, and they had literacy tests here too, and these are meant to target Native Americans. These really hurt Native Americans because at the time most of them didn't know English, especially they couldn't read it. And even though, Oh yeah, and even though Mexican is not a race, these literacy tests are still used to target Mexicans because a lot of them were not as familiar with English. And again, even if you were really smart, it had a perfect score. And so if there's like 50 questions, you miss one, oh, look, you failed, guess you don't get to vote. Yeah, I know. What was I? But right. Yeah. Oh, so right. This is a map of the region, according to the 1930 U.S. Census, based on racial categories. And even if you go back, Arizona was always a diverse state. Like in this AZ Central article, showed at the end. I think in 1910, like 14% of the state's population was Native American. Well, today it's only 5%. You know, and even in 1930, in the census here, we have two Mexican majority counties, Pinal and Santa Cruz. And by the way, Mexican was the term they used on the census, and they also use these terms here, which I'm not going to say out loud. But yeah, the terms here in the map here, the terms they used in the census. And this is what the racial makeup of this region was in 1930. But anyway, the literacy tests were the main way that Native Americans and Chicanos were disenfranchised in Arizona. But there was also, Native Americans faced other barriers. Native Americans weren't even U.S. citizens until I think it was 1926. A law was passed that gave them citizenship. So they couldn't even vote in their own country, their own historic, where they've always lived longer than white people until 1926. But even after that, they were franchised federally. The state of Arizona still denied them the right to vote, and found state officials find excuses saying they're not fully American. They're citizens of their reservation, and which are sovereign nations, and they're different. They're wards of the state. They had all these arguments as to why Native Americans shouldn't be allowed to vote, but those were all made their way up to the Supreme Court. They were all found illegal and unconstitutional, and they were franchised in 1948. But even despite that, they still used the literacy tests to disenfranchise Native Americans. Yeah, next slide, please. I like the painting going on here. It's really cool. So eventually, when you get to the 1950s and 60s, you have the civil rights movement, and people are against that. It was an international thing. I mean, you have decolonization around the world, but like the American form of that was the civil rights movement, and just like slavery was. Oh, it's okay. I'll keep talking.
Okay.
So, just like slavery was the big defining issue in America up until 1865, and then in the early 1960s, it was. Are we going to get it back up?
I need a charger.
Oh, okay.
What kind of charger? What is my?
I have the slideshow on my phone.
I'm so sorry.
So while we're getting it back up, I'll.
It's like a commercial break.
Yeah, commercial break. I like that perspective.
Got one more.
Here we go.
The times on the cord.
Oh no, it's okay.
It's editable.
So anyway, the suit I'm wearing today, the red on green, that was a deliberate choice because since I'm talking about Arizona, I can look like a nopal cactus. Thank you.
And you look great.
Yeah.
It's the prickly pear?
No, it's it's a nopal. It's the kind of cactus. They're like they have the fan things with the red fruits on them. Yes.
I think it's also I think that's the same as prickly pear.
Oh, maybe.
I put it on tacos.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on cacti, despite being from Phoenix, Arizona.
You gotta grow up with the plant mom and then work in garden department both a while. Yeah.
I do have to water my mom's plants though when she's gone.
I leave my plants with my mom because I even though I know about them, I still grow them. I don't know why.
Oh.
Too busy.
So anyway, civil rights, it was a big issue in the early 1960s, and eventually there would be an election that was all about the civil rights movement. In 1964, they passed the Civil Rights Act, which says you can't discriminate people because of their race and gender and sex, and I don't know the exact wording, but those are like the three things you're not allowed to discriminate people based on, and the Supreme Court has also interpreted that as including sexual orientation and gender identity. I think that was a decision from a few years ago. And then 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which got rid of all those literacy tests and other laws that made it harder for Black indigenous and mixed race people to vote. But anyway, in 1964, there was a presidential election, and it ended up being about the Civil Rights Act. That was kind of one of the big issues. There was also the war in Vietnam, but that wasn't really as big of a thing as that would become in the years later. And anyway, the two candidates in the race were try going just to the slides app, the slides website. Oh, okay.
So everyone's gonna vote for Holden in the Arizona State Senate when he runs in a couple years from now, right?
No, thank you, Alana, but I think if I got involved in politics, it wouldn't be in Arizona.
You're the only person I would trust. I know.
Thank you.
Where would
I
you?
would trust you
Oh,
too.
you would go to swing state, huh?
Well, this is a swing state.
Oh, you're right.
So anyway, this is the 1964 presidential election. LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, he took over after Kennedy was assassinated in the previous year. He was a Democrat, and Barry Goldwater was the Republican nominee. And Barry Goldwater was a senator from Arizona, and he would be for a long time. You know, we got a high school. We have a lot of stuff named after him here, like the high school.
I went to that one.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, they're
That football.
So you guys should know all about this.
You have it exactly.
Yeah, let's go Bulldogs, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just looked at our football teams.
So
I went to
yeah, so I mean, what happened was this was kind of one of some historians, not all, consider this to be the beginning of the current party system, where the Republican Party or the Grand Old Party (GOP) are kind of more to the right on pretty much all issues compared with the Democratic Party. And Goldwater, I mean, he was pretty right wing. He was against the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. And he says it wasn't because he was racist, but because he believed in states' rights, although the senators from these states actually were much more open about them being against it because they're racist. And anyway, so he kind of campaigned against that. He was libertarian, small federal government, against the Civil Rights Act, and you know, and Barry Goldwater, his campaign said their motto is "In your heart, you know he's right." To which the Johnson campaign responded, "In your guts, you know he's nuts." And the American, and they had this one really effective campaign ad that showed like him starting a nuclear war, and that really moved a lot of people. And the end result was that most Americans decided that Goldwater was just too right-wing and too extreme, and he lost in a pretty big landslide, even without black people being allowed to vote yet, and other non-white groups. So anyway, under the Voting Rights Act, there was a provision that in states that had a history of voter suppression and literacy tests, if they wanted to pass a law related to voting, they had to get pre-clearance first from the Department of Justice to make sure that law was not racially discriminatory. And it applied to 11 states. Alaska was one for some reason, probably because of the Inuits there, but it mostly applied to southern states, but it also applied to Arizona. And as you can see on this electoral map here, you have Arizona voting with the southern states where that applied. Bye-bye, ladies. Thank you for coming. And that law, for a long time, it prevented a lot of voter suppression laws from passing until in 2013, the Supreme Court struck that provision down, saying it was no longer necessary because that racism isn't as much of a problem in America anymore, they argued, although I would beg to differ with that. But anyway, you know, you kind of have, like, where you have this happening is you have these southern states, and then all of a sudden you have a state that's not close to them, where you also have these pre-clearances necessary. And it's unfortunate as in Arizona that we're kind of in the same category as southern states in this regard. But anyway, for a long time, voter suppression, while it was still existed throughout America, wasn't as much of a problem because of the strong provisions in the Voting Rights Act. And that part getting struck down in 2013 was a big issue. So course, all of this still matters to us today here in Arizona, and voter suppression in Arizona now still takes several forms. So one is the ban on ballot collection, also known as ballot harvesting, uh, and that was passed. I don't remember exactly when by the state legislature, but what it does is if you're not someone's family member, what would happen is some people they aren't able to vote for some reason, so they'll have someone else pick up their ballot for them, sealed, and take it and cast it for them, uh, their mail-in ballot. And this law banned that unless you're that person's family member. And the issue with that is, for a lot of people who are elderly, they maybe aren't very mobile and can't get out. They're elderly pensioners.
They live
or
within nursing homes where family may come to visit every
Yeah.
so often.
Or maybe they are really busy with work and they're not able to go and vote. That ban affected a lot of really vulnerable, the most vulnerable people in society. They say call it harvesting, I guess, to make it sound scary, like the Grim Reaper. But ballot collection or ballot harvesting, it's not a bad thing. Some people just aren't able to make it, and they're entrusting their ballot with someone else to cast it for them, and that's okay. So another form, huh?
Apparently by law it's not.
Yeah, well, and that actually, the Ninth Circuit Court struck it down, but then it went up to the Supreme Court in 2021, and they upheld it.
Oh, okay, that's unfortunate.
So that's still the law in Arizona. And I'm going to get to this one at the end. Felon disenfranchisement, 4%, I think, according to the Center for Public Integrity, 4.3% of adults in Arizona can't vote because they, at one point in their life, committed a felony. And, while you don't want anyone to commit felonies, at the same time, if you've served your sentence and done your time and learned your lesson, I think it's time for you to get let back into society and be allowed to finally vote and have a say again. That is the case in a lot of states. In fact, I think in Maine, you can even vote from prison. You don't even have to serve your time. But I'm not saying we have to go that far. It's just when I think if you served out your punishment, and you learned your lesson, you should be allowed. But that's not in Arizona. We have felon disenfranchisement, and oftentimes the cause of poverty or the cause of crime is poverty. So you can see how a law like this would target poor working class people who end up, unfortunately, as criminals and get sentenced and convicted. So another way is polling place accessibility. A lot of polling places get moved around, and especially this happens more often in mostly non-white areas, and they get moved around and shut down, and if you're in the wrong precinct, they won't let you vote. But in 2017, Maricopa County got a new reporter, Adrian Fuentes. He's now the Secretary of State, and I've actually met him before, and he's talked about this a lot. As one of his biggest accomplishments as county reporter was he made it so that if you live in Maricopa County, you can vote anywhere in Maricopa County, and it will count as a vote towards your correct precinct. The voting place will just figure it out, and that's great. It was so great that Pima County, the second largest county in Arizona, copied it. So now we have the two largest counties in Arizona doing that and making things more convenient for people, that you don't have to go to the exact right precinct for your vote to count, as long as you're in the right county. Linguistic accessibility. So because of the Voting Rights Act, they have to make things accessible to voters in their language. So some areas they have to have voting materials available in Spanish or Apache or Navajo. However, oftentimes the voting material in those languages, the same effort isn't put into it as the English voting material. So they don't have all the same information. So one example I saw was in 2012, the Spanish voter information guides had the wrong election date, while the English guides did not.
So I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and then another is so in Arizona for mail-in voting, they're trying to make that harder. We used to have the permanent early voting list, but in 2021, Doug Ducey, who's governor, signed a law turning that into the active. That should say AEVL and not AVEL, but active early voting list. So it basically disenfranchised a lot of mail-in voters because they hadn't voted in the last few years, and they had to go and register again. which wasn't really necessary. I mean, if there was no need for that, it just made it harder for people to vote. And all of these, I know you might be thinking, well, does this really make a difference in an election? I mean, how much does this matter? How many people are we talking about here? Talking about a few dozen people who might be unable to vote because of this stuff? No, this affects hundreds of thousands of Arizona voters. I mean, all of this stuff put together. I mean, and that can, and yes, we have 7 million people in this state, but that in a close election in a swing state like here, that can really, really make a difference. So anyway, this last one I want to get to here, and that I know I didn't order it correctly, is citizenship tests. So there's a lot of laws. There's laws here in Arizona that make it, you have to prove you're a citizen in order to vote. You know, at first that might sound reasonable, like, oh yeah, you know, but when you look into what these laws actually do, is in order to get on the voter rolls in the first place, you have to prove you're a citizen. So, but you still have to do more after that under these laws. So what the effect of this really is, it makes it harder for citizens to vote. I mean, why don't you ask yourself the question, can you prove that you're a citizenship? Because your driver's license, that doesn't count. It doesn't say on there where you were born or if you're a citizenship. You might need a passport or a birth certificate, and those things aren't as easy to get. And if you change your name, like if you got married or change your name for some other reason, your birth certificate is it won't have the same name, and that won't work as proof. Americans, we don't, because we're such a big country, we don't travel as much. So a lot of us, in fact, I think the majority don't have passports. I do, but a lot of Americans don't. So proving your citizenship isn't as easy as it sounds. And this law actually, I think that's one of the sources. It said specifically it just made it harder for, I think, 140,000 Arizonans to vote, even though nearly all of those people were citizens. Yeah. So anyway, is that the last slide before sources?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go. We can go back to this one. So anyway, what can we do to fix these problems? Well, I already talked about that one. Well, for one, we would need to. Oh, I almost forgot. So citizenship tests. If you think that's bad, well, there's actually a bill that just passed the House of Representatives, the federal one, Washington D.C., not the state one here in Phoenix, that would take these citizenship tests and make them federal and apply them to all 50 states. And it's called the SAVE Act. I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but it would take it to the national level. It's already passed the House, and it will probably, I don't know about the Senate. Things are slower there. They have the filibuster. But I can tell you, if it got to President Donald Trump's desk, he would almost certainly sign it into law. So I would be on the lookout for that. So what can we do to stop all of this? Well, for one, polling place accessibility. I already explained the solution to that. Thank you, Adrian Fontes. Felon, we should repeal a lot of these discriminatory laws. I think we need a new Voting Rights Act that kind of at the federal level tackles all of these issues and expands access to voting like that did. So not just strengthen it, but have a whole new one. They tried to do that in previous Congresses. They had the For the People Act that would have done that, but that failed. I mean, it would have done some good stuff. I just lost my train of thought.
The first one.
Oh yeah, so we need to, huh?
You got it.
But yeah, we need to repeal a lot of these discriminatory laws and have a reinvigorated, a new Voting Rights Act that makes. Oh, that's right. That's what I was going to say. So, voter registration. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could have, same-day voter registration? I mean, like imagine on election day you go out to vote and you didn't know and you learned that you didn't register to vote. Oh, I didn't know the deadline. I didn't get it in time. I guess I just don't get to vote this year. What if instead we have same-day voter registration? I mean, wouldn't that you're not registered to vote? Well, let's get that taken care of right now so you can go vote. I mean, wouldn't that be great? But it would be even better. Bless you. Salud. You're welcome. What would be even better is if we had automatic voter registration. I mean, you know, if you're an 18-year-old, 18 years or older, and you're a U.S. citizen, you know, you should be, once you have ID, you should be registered to vote automatically, get put in the voter rolls automatically. I mean, that would be great, you know. I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't have that if, assuming our goal is to be a democracy. Oh, but it doesn't actually say anywhere in our Constitution that the United States are a democracy, and nor is there anything in there that gives you an explicit right to vote. So I think those are both, we should have a Constitution that has both of those things, because without the explicit right to vote, voting, it's something you have to go out of your way to register for and make sure you're able to do. But if it were a right, you know, it would be the government's job to make sure that you're able to vote and can do that if you want to and are registered automatically. So that would be that's something that we should have. You know, that's a pretty important right, you know, to control our government. Because I mean, a lot of people in the GOP are saying the United States are a republic, not a democracy. You know what? They're actually kind of right. But we should be a democracy. We should have a government by the people, for the people, because you know ultimately people know what's best for themselves. They can make policies in their own interests and not a small group of elites at the top. That's a government that is more utilitarian and beneficial for the majority.
Not to interrupt, but sometimes I think it would be better off if each state just conducted itself without the oversight of the federal government.
Well, and I think that's a good point. I think I think decentralization in states' rights also has validity, and that's not at all incompatible with democracy. You know, as long as there is democracy in those states as well. You know, I think a lot of states also know what's best for themselves, and I think democracy and decentralization can perfectly complement each other. Bye bye. Thanks for coming.
Democracy and decentralization can
complement each other. Yeah, so these are some problems and some solutions that I have, and then on the next slide are my sources. So these are about the history. I folded this because this is the most detailed and important articles from AZ Central. And if anyone has any questions, please let me know. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alana.
I actually very much enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, hold it for next president.
Thank you.
This is why you are a very good presenter. Yes.
Thank you.
This is why, like, and I speak to everyone else, especially from Hispanic folks here, why it's very important for you guys to be aware of what's happening, because know that a lot of these do affect our families, the communities, but then also you guys. So that's why you're just getting involved, or at least like learning what's going on around you is really important. And I feel like a lot of times, especially when we're coming from first-gen families, we don't know. Even up to second-gen families, we still don't know, and so that's very important to also be that first one to lead, and be aware of the things that happen, because they do end up affecting us. So this is why they say voting is very important. And so if you guys didn't vote or weren't able to vote, but hopefully by next year you guys can, or whenever they're open, I would encourage you.
Thank you for that, Cynthia.
Of course.